Hello everybody and welcome. This week I'll be reading Of Donuts and Demons, which first appeared in the 2022 anthology Old Scratch, Demon Tales and Devil Hells, published by Pinnacle Press. You will find a link where you can purchase that anthology in the description below. And without further ado, let's get into our first episode of Donuts and Demons. Officer Crawford's fingers wiggled greedily over the open box of donuts, cream-filled and chocolate-coated, cinnamon-dusted, glistening glazed, raspberry-filled, chocolate, peanut-encrusted, and more, tempted and enticed his watering mouth. Decisions, he whispered under his breath. He'd never met a donut he didn't like, which was obvious based on his bulging waistline. The plain crullers were boring to look at, but they were the best ones to go with a cup of coffee. His fingers twitched, honing in on a powdered raspberry-filled wonder. Excellent choice, a voice to his left confirmed. Crawford looked at the unfamiliar, much younger, red-headed man in uniform. The man smiled as he reached around Crawford's lingering gut to pluck his choice from the donut box. I'm more a chocolate donut man myself. Crawford resisted stuffing the powdered, sugar-coated treat into his mouth. He took a napkin instead and stepped away from the break room table. They're all good, he said. I don't think we've met, he added. The stranger held out his empty right hand. McGuire, Levi McGuire, just hired last Friday. I brought in the donuts. Crawford shook McGuire's hand. It was hot and sweaty, probably nerves. He was young, at least half of Crawford's 55 years, and likely fresh from the academy. Crawford felt a twinge of envy. Pleased to meet you, Levi. Martin Crawford. This your first assignment? McGuire laughed. That obvious, huh? Been dreaming about this day for a long time. Welcome aboard. Owen's a pretty small town. Some days all you do is patrol and sit on traffic watch. Nothing happens. Other times folks go loony and it's nonstop. Crawford eyed the donut in his hand, longing for a bite and the sweet, sweet jelly to fill his mouth. He cleared his throat and checked his watch. Well, I'll see you at roll call in about 15 minutes. Oh, yeah, sure, see you then. The newcomer bit into his donut and headed over to the stainless steel coffee pot in the corner. Crawford's first bite consumed a third of the donut. It was absolutely delicious. He crammed the remaining 2/3 into his mouth, chewed all of half a dozen times and swallowed, wiped his mouth and the front of his uniform with a napkin, and turned back to the box. After a quick glance over his shoulder and seeing McGuire had wandered off to parts unknown, Crawford nabbed a second, glazed this time, and pretended it was his first as other officers trickled into the room. After roll call, where McGuire was introduced and assigned a partner, not Crawford, 4 of 6 patrol cars went their separate ways. I'll drive, Crawford told his partner, Haley, 30-something, and a whole lot thinner and in far better shape. Crawford preferred to be behind the wheel. He could maneuver a cop car like it was nothing, but flinging off a seatbelt and hopping out of the same car on a dead run in hot pursuit wasn't something that was going to happen these days. He'd left his gung-ho attitude behind years ago. Now he dreamed only of making it to retirement on the sunny beaches of Florida and a fishing boat. The 2 officers weren't more than 3 hours into their routine when Crawford felt the first twinges of discomfort deep in his stomach. He belched and groaned. Oh, damn. You okay there? Yeah, just a little indigestion. Nothing a Rolaids won't fix. You got any? Nope. Crawford chuckled. Guess I'll just have to tough it out. He belched again, almost gagged. Tasted like shit. Literally. Jesus Christ. Coughing, Haley pushed the button to lower his window. I don't think Christ has anything to do with that. Sure that didn't come out your ass? Maybe we should stop at the pharmacy. Or a latrine. That's nasty. Crawford headed back towards Main Street and the nearest drugstore. Haley waited dutifully in the car. Crawford didn't make it to the antacid aisle before a pain so sharp and deep bent him over, clutching his stomach as sweat sprang to his thick, dark brows. Shit! He swore. Maybe a trip to the men's room was in order before he found the chewable tablets he was after. A good long shit. That's probably all he needed. It was that second donut. He should have known better. The discomfort eased but did not entirely go away. Crawford waddled to the back corner of the store and slipped into the men's room. 5 minutes became 10, became 15, became a tentative knock on the locked restroom door. "Crawford, you all right in there?" It was Haley. "Yeah," he replied, but he was lying. "Give me a couple more minutes, just finishing up." His gut felt better, but his head was throbbing. Stomach bug. Crawford finished, he hoped, flushed twice, and shuffled to the sink. The man in the mirror was red-faced with the most bloodshot eyes Crawford had ever seen. He leaned in closer. The whites of his eyes were more than bloodshot. They were such a dark shade of red he half expected them to start oozing blood. "Damn," he groaned, as he pulled down one of his bottom lids with an index finger. This was not good. Crawford leaned back and turned on the faucet, letting the water run cold. He could almost hear the hiss of steam as the water hit the feverish skin on his face. Maybe he should have Hallie drive him home, or hell, to the emergency room. What if he had a blood clot or something in his brain? He pressed his eyes shut against the vision of them exploding right out of his head, like two big blood and pus-filled cysts. Bile kissed the back of his throat as he splashed more water on his face in an effort to calm the rising disgust. Patting his face and hands dry, he caught another glimpse of himself in the mirror. His reflection's grin was wide and devious. Why the hell was he smiling? Crawford's hand slid down to the right side of his utility belt. His fingers caressed the leather holster for a moment. Then the cool, sturdy grip of the pistol nestled there. His mouth watered as he thought of the thick, ruby-red filling of a raspberry donut and how much it reminded him of blood. He drew the weapon and pressed the side of the cool barrel against his overheated cheek. It felt good, real good, dangerously good. Another glance in the mirror revealed a pair of completely black eyes staring back at him, sclera, irises, and all. He knew immediately what he had to do. Crawford, grinning like a mad fool, stepped from the men's room and went to work, his stomach problems forgotten. "Hey, Hallie!" Crawford marched down the hallway to where Hallie stood pretending to look at a selection of canes. The younger officer barely had time to turn and look at his partner, a mere 6 feet away with his service revolver aimed, before a bullet pierced through the middle of his forehead and exploded out the back, dropping Hallie first to his knees, then flat on his face. Crawford yanked the dead man's gun from his belt. Screams erupted immediately. Crawford paid them no mind. The next 2 bullets hit a couple of customers waiting in line at the back of the pharmacy. One got it in the neck, a fountain of blood immediately pumping into the air, dousing a display of reading glasses. The other took it in the center of the chest. As she half turned, as if to run, the folks behind the pharmacy counter had all taken cover behind shelves. He didn't have time to hunt them down. "Delicious," he thought, and headed for the front door, licking his lips. 2 more victims were gunned down in the parking lot. An old lady with a walker was no match for the Glock's firepower, especially from less than 2 feet away. A much younger guy rushing across the blacktop towards the bloodthirsty cop, perhaps drawn by the gunshots and screams for help, was stopped dead in his track with a bullet in the stomach. Crawford chuckled at the way the guy's mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like the gasping fish Crawford had been looking forward to catching in Florida one day. He climbed into the cruiser. His radio beeped and squawked with too many voices. On the other side of town, he could hear sirens drawing closer. Crawford hurriedly started the engine. He could feel the massive grin on his face. It must look diabolical. His eyes were burning, pulsing with the thud, thud, thud of his heart, making everything around him throb in time. The pain in his head was easily overshadowed by the pleasure, lustful, hungry, sweet pleasure. He'd even forgotten about the possibility of his eyeballs popping. An icy shiver zipped up his spine like lightning, sending goosebumps down both arms. "What are you doing? What is wrong with you? Crawford's brain demanded to know. You're a police officer, for God's sake. Get control of yourself. That's right. Get control of yourself. Show them who's boss. Heat clawed its way from the center of his gut, up to his throat and into his skull like a wave of molten lava. No amount of Rolaids stood a chance against the likes of this kind of heartburn. Show them that nobody makes fun of Martin Crawford. The corners of Crawford's mouth sagged down. He wasn't deaf. He knew what they said behind his back. He was too out of shape. He shouldn't be allowed on the force. He's useless. He's old. Get rid of him. Crawford's teeth ground together in rage. Which way? Where to next? That's right, Martin. Now get a move on. The pigs are closing in. Slamming the vehicle into drive, Crawford decided on the grocery store. Ah, the hustle and bustle of busy shoppers innocently going about their business. He chuckled and switched on his white and red lights and added the cruiser's high-pitched scream to the chorus already floating through the village street. It matched the noise in his head perfectly, agony and fear. He smacked his lips as if he could taste it in the wind, thick and rich and coppery. You are listening to Of Donuts and Demons by Pamela Morris, a.k.a. That Witchy Chick. If you're enjoying this tale and would like more, visit my website, PamelaMorrisBooks.com, for a full selection of my available novels and collections. Link is in the description below. And now, back to the story. On his way out of the pharmacy parking lot, Crawford, sadly, missed the woman pushing the baby stroller. She got out of the way barely in time, and damn, that was disappointing. Had there been more time, the urge to give her a run for her money crossed his mind. But he had things to do, and that meant people to slaughter, and time was short. It was exactly as he'd hoped. People everywhere, and unaware, and not a one prepared. Crawford bit into his lower lip as his fingers tightened on the steering wheel and his foot pressed down on the gas. The cruiser lurched and slammed head-on into a precariously loaded shopping cart, sending its unsuspecting driver backwards. The cart skidded sideways, its contents cascading from multiple colorful bags. Its male owner slipped and fell. Giggles bubbled from between Crawford's lips at the satisfying bump and crunch coming out from under the vehicle's undercarriage, followed by the guttural bellow of agonizing pain wrought from a chest full of broken ribs and at least one deflating lung. He inhaled deeply, savoring the satisfying sound and the smell of blood. It was better than anything he'd ever heard or smelled before. His stomach growled, no longer upset, but as if he hadn't eaten all day. He was so hungry. Crawford whipped the car around to the next aisle, eyes flickering back and forth at what he'd hoped would be a buffet. But folks were smarter than that, it seemed. They'd run for the store or dove into the relative safety of their vehicles. He should have gone downtown and plowed down the sidewalk, but it was too late for that now. The others were coming. 2 more patrol cars arrived, sirens wailing, lights strobing red and white, red and white, red and white. Behind the windshields, his bewildered fellow officers stared back at him, mouths agape, eyes wide. He'd taken them all by surprise. They'd never seen this coming, nor had he for that matter, but that was neither here nor there. It was happening, and it felt great. Payback is a bitch, fellas. Crawford pulled his weapon and lowered the vehicle's 2 front windows. He tapped the gas, letting the vehicle creep forward, slow and unassuming. He smiled at the other cops as their vehicles got closer together. How close you idiots going to let me get? The second vehicle had pulled down the other adjacent aisle and was easing its way in from behind. Barlow, in the front-facing car, put the radio's mic up to his mouth and used the PA. "Stop right there, Crawford," he ordered. Crawford stopped. 2 more cruisers pulled into the parking lot. It was getting too tight. Any more of the sons of bitches and he'd not have an exit. Right now it was a straight shot. Put your hands up where I can see them, Marty. You know the drill. 2 vehicles moved into place behind him. Crawford straightened his wheels, aiming them for the nice wide hole they'd left open down at the intersection, then lifted both hands where the others could see them and waited. 3. Get out of the vehicle slowly. He ever so carefully reached up and undid his seatbelt. 2. The faces of his fellow officers relaxed, their eyes and minds blinded by trust. 1. Crawford punched his foot on the gas. The cruiser lurched forward. The air was filled with the scream of his tires and the stench of burning rubber. His hand slammed back into place on the steering wheel, and before Barlow could even think to do anything but let out a shriek of his own, Crawford was flying by in the opposite direction. Cop car number 6 was just reaching the intersection from the center of town as Crawford barreled through, whipping his vehicle to the left, heading west, out of town. He was going 80 in a 45 before he crossed the village line. And away we go! Stop this. Now. It's not too late. Stop. Give yourself up. Fuck you. A cacophony of sirens and roaring engines were fast on his trail. The radio told him everything he needed to know. The Stadies were coming in from the west like some pathetic version of the cavalry, here to save the fucking day. Hi-ho, Silver! Away! At the top of the hill, known as the Devil's Elbow, Crawford swerved off the road and into the parking lot of the abandoned stripper club. The place had been empty and falling apart for a solid 10 years, but oh, the memories, the lap dances, the shaved pussies, the cute, perky, jiggling titties he'd enjoyed back in his youth. How he missed those lust-filled nights back before he was a cop, back before he'd gotten fat and old and useless. Motherfuckers, you took everything from me, everything. Crawford jammed the vehicle into park just short of smashing into the front of the building. The tune of wailing sirens reminded him of the stories he'd heard of banshees or the ghost of a screaming woman folks around these parts associated with the place. The lady in white or the white lady or whatever the hell she was called or wore. And then there was that murder a few years ago. Another stripper, something to do with Satan worshippers or witches. He couldn't remember the details, nor did he care at this juncture in his life. Blue and red and white lights strobed around him. Crawford opened the cruiser's door and climbed out. He turned to face them, blinking and nearly blinded by the flashing lights. Crawford, halt! Put your hands up and drop to the ground. Crawford, now! Crawford shivered against the sweat that dampened his blue shirt and trickled down the sides of his face. He looked at his fellow officers, a brotherhood of old friends, eyes flickering from one to the other, noting the blurry white auras that radiated like halos around them. They were all good, law-abiding men, to protect and serve. He watched as McGuire calmly got out of the patrol car he'd been assigned. Unlike the rest of them, he didn't seem upset at all. Cool as a cucumber. He had his shit together for sure. McGuire drew his weapon just as all the others had, taking steady aim at Crawford. Crawford, down on your knees, now, Barlow ordered. The new guy waited, met Crawford's gaze, and smiled like the hellish clown in that Stephen King movie. He'd completely lost the nervous air about him that had set him apart as a rookie back in the station. You got this, buddy. I believe in you. A dark shadow drifted lazily about the newcomer. It told Crawford that Levi McGuire wasn't like any of the others. He wasn't like the rest of them at all. What the hell have you done to me? Crawford bellowed, realizing the full impact of what he'd done with sickening horror. He spun around and sprinted toward the side of the building, knowing full well there was nothing but a sheer rocky drop-off down to the river on the other side. Marty, no, stop! Somebody stop him! He couldn't be 100% sure, but Crawford thought he heard laughter as he jumped and crashed and rolled, as bones snapped and punctured through thick fatty flesh, as neck bones crunched and a skull cracked, as blood splattered on rocks and trees and coated his mouth with oozing red gore that bubbled from between his lips, coating them in a thick, gluey, jelly-like substance that didn't taste like raspberry filling at all. Levi McGuire stepped up to the counter of the busy shop. He was no longer employed by the Owen Village Police Department, nor any law enforcement agency for that matter, due to the trauma he'd experienced on that first day on the job. In fact, he'd given up the police force altogether, at least for the time being. People were so easily deceived. It didn't matter. He had other interests he wanted to explore, other skills and other ways to keep himself busy and make a living. "What can I get you this morning?" the teenage girl behind the counter asked. "Dozen donuts," he said, eyes scanning the sweet confections offered. 2 cinnamon, 2 glazed, 2 custard-filled, a peanut-coated, a coconut, 2 apple-filled, and 2 of the raspberry jelly. She dutifully filled the box as he rattled off the flavors. "One more." Her gloved hand hovered over the racks. "That's 12, McGuire said. "Yes, sir, but we sell them by the devil's dozen here, 13. "Oh." Levi couldn't stop the grin from spreading across his face or the ripple of hot, hellish delight that tingled up his spine. "This is my kind of donut shop." He added a single plain cruller. "The doctors and nurses in the ER are going to love these. It's been a hell of a year." "It sure has." You have just listened to Postcards from Barnesville with Pamela Morris, that witchy chick. A place for free short stories that otherwise may have spent their dark lives lonely and unloved. Please subscribe and hit that like button if you've enjoyed this reading and to keep the stories coming. Be sure to check your mailbox for another postcard from Barnesville, from that witchy chick soon. And thank you for listening.